For this portion of Module 1, we will be discussing specific elements of critical thinking as it relates to disposition, style, and skill. This will be a good place to reflect on your scores from your UFCTI assessment. For this module, you will listen and view the presentation, complete readings or other assignments as instructed during the presentation, perform an activity, and complete the quiz. As a quick reminder, the main objectives for this module are for you to be able to analyze components of critical thinking as well as describe your own critical thinking style. Critical thinking has traditionally been defined by the dispositions that people have towards it and the tangible skills used to demonstrate it. More recently, the notion of style has been incorporated to reflect one's natural preference for critical thinking. Fascioni explored the notion of disposition with the 1990 completion of the Delphi study. At that time, there were 7 unique dispositions identified. Through additional research completed at the University of Florida, the list was compiled down to 3: engagement, cognitive maturity, and innovativeness. These 3 together provide a sense of one's natural inclination toward critical thinking. Engagement focuses in on one's sense of the world around them, how they see the world. Cognitive maturity emphasizes the confidence or self-efficacy that one has about their critical thinking. Lastly, innovativeness orients critical thinking with respect to truth-seeking and inquisitiveness. Over the past 10 years, research has continued to fine-tune our understanding of critical thinking. Through additional research and refinement, the idea of style has been uncovered. These overlap with what we understand about critical thinking disposition, but focus more on our preferences for such behaviors. You may liken this to understanding one's learning style. Whereas disposition refers to our natural inclination, style brings attention to a personal perception of how we like to think critically. Your UFCTI score is a new way to see your own critical thinking style. As we begin to think about how critical thinking impacts our lives and our teaching, take a few minutes to reflect on the prompts provided. In one analogy, critical thinking disposition is compared to the nature of a porcelain coffee cup, in that it holds the disposition to break, but through care it doesn't. If our critical thinking ability was nothing more than disposition, then what point would there be to focus on developing it? Many of you will probably recognize the basketball player flying through the air as Michael Jordan. Michael's story is a great example of how disposition can influence our natural ability to acquire a skill, but practice is what will really create a long-term impact on our behavior. Jordan's early high school career was not initially successful, having been considered too short to be of value for the varsity team. With a growth spurt and a lot of rigorous practice, he proved to them otherwise. In this next section, we'll go through each of the 6 key skills defined by Fascioni's 1990 Delphi study. These have held true and are complementary to the instructional work of Elder. Interpretation is a foundational critical thinking skill, in that it gives a point of comparison when considering new information. If you are familiar with the notion of cognitive dissonance, interpretation is the skill that allows us to reflect on how the information fits with our current understanding of the issue or problem. It's also one that we instill at a very young age. Consider the simple game of one of these things is not like the other. Once we determine where the information fits, we can take a little more in-depth look at its meaning. Through analysis, one can reflect on the intent of the message or information. What is at the crux of what is being communicated? What assumptions are driving the information? More importantly, How is the information being substantiated? What is the evidence provided? When one evaluates the information presented, it is important to identify the criteria for which it is being evaluated. The criteria for making the evaluation align with the universal intellectual standards supported by the Foundation for Critical Thinking. We'll talk more about these in the next module. The skill of inference specifically addresses how we deduce conclusions based on information other than what is explicitly presented. Assumptions and inferences often work in similar ways, as they are both means for making conclusions. Assumptions are based on core beliefs and values, whereas inferences are based on truths in other information. For example, I may assume that my grandmother's apple pie is the best in town. This is a belief based on my deeply connected values of family. I could infer that my grandmother's was the best in town if she had provided the recipe to a baker who won an apple pie baking contest in town. I am making a conclusion based on other information I know to be true. In explanation, we draw on our need to be justified and to be presented with information that is justified. The most simplistic way to develop the skill of explanation is through the consistent use of justification, truly understanding and being able to state procedures and rationale. This skill is really an ultimate goal, whether as an educator or in our own lives. We must be able to reflect on our current beliefs and values and understand where they came from and what they are grounded in. Likewise, in those cases where an experience is truly transformational, we are provided the latitude to grow and change. This combination of self-examination and correction is the place where our growth as individuals is anchored. With this bit of knowledge about critical thinking and how it takes shape, either through our disposition, style, or practice, you can begin to see why providing explicit instruction for it is so valuable. In the next module, we will present instructional pedagogy, which supports the development of and builds capacity for critical thinking.